So now I have reached that point in time where I have the great pleasure of formally introducing our incredible co-host for today, MaryFrances Winters. And as I always do, I'm going to give her a formal introduction. Then I'm going to invite her to unmute herself and to share with this community in her own way any remarks and maybe tell her DEI story, things that we would not know about her by reading her bio. MaryFrances Winters is the founder and CEO of the Winters Group, Inc., a global organization development and diversity and inclusion consulting firm with over 37 years of experience. Dubbed a thought leader in the field, for the past 3 decades, she has impacted over hundreds of organizations and thousands of individuals with her thought-provoking message and her approach to diversity and inclusion. Ms. Winters is a master strategist with experience in strategic planning, change management, diversity, organization development, training and facilitation, systems thinking, and qualitative and quantitative research methods. She has served on national not-for-profit, corporate, and university boards and has received many awards and honors, including the Athena Leadership Award, Diversity Pioneer, Profiles in Diversity Journal, for those of you who are familiar with that, the Winds of Change, a forum on workplace inclusion, and Forbes Top 10 Diversity Trailblazers. We actually share that in common. I think that's where I first started really following you, MaryFrances. She is the author of not one, not two, six books, including the recent release of Black Fatigue. If you have not heard about it, you have been asleep, because many people are really gravitating towards the message in that book. How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit, and Inclusive Conversations, Fostering Equity, Empathy, and Belonging Across Differences. And so help me, Intentional Conversations VodCast community, in your own way, to welcome our guest co-host today. Give her a round of applause if you can, whatever you can do, words of affirmation into our chat. Let her know that we are so appreciative that she is joining us today. And MaryFrances, just greet us in your own way. How are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It is so good to be with you all today. I see our friends from Canada, and so you're talking about things you may not know about me. I have a Canadian connection. My parents are actually Canadians. My mother grew up in a place called Owen Sound, Ontario, which is not that far from Ottawa, and probably a couple of hours, I guess, from Toronto. So I spent a lot of summers in Canada. So a lot of people don't know that about me. I grew up on the American side of Niagara Falls. And so here I am, she, her, hers. I am all about equity and justice, and have been since I was in high school. I was the editor of my high school newspaper where they wouldn't let me write about things like, well, they would let me write about Martin Luther King Jr., but they wouldn't let me write about Malcolm X. And so this has been something that I have been doing for most of my life, looking at and trying to uncover and eradicate inequities. My first job in the corporate world, I went to the Eastman Kodak Company in Rochester, New York, after graduating from the University of Rochester, after being told by my high school guidance counselor that that school was probably too lofty a goal for somebody like me. And then I became the first trustee at the University of Rochester in 1987, the first Black trustee. And I'm back on the board now. I was on the board 87 to 97, and they've just asked me to come back on the board. But this first job at the Eastman Kodak Company, I ended up in affirmative action because somebody who looks like me should do affirmative action. And that was 1973, so it was a long time ago, but it was soon after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it was an interesting experience. But after 10 years in the corporate world, I recognized that I couldn't be who I wanted to be because other people were telling me who I should be and how I should be. This was long before we were telling people, bring your full self to work. This was during the days when we were telling people not to bring your full self to work. And I didn't know who myself was because I was being told to do this, that, or the other. So this work has always been a passion of mine. It's been interesting to see how it has evolved over the years and how much we have achieved and yet how much we have not. I was telling Nika that my daughter, Marisha Reese, works for the company now. She's an engineer by training. She's been with the Winters Group now almost 10 years, but her experience in the corporate world was very, very similar to my experience in the corporate world. So a generation later, she was still experiencing the microaggressions, experiencing the tokenism and all of those things that many of us experience. And so I'm heartened that we are where we are, today, but I'm also sad that after 37 years in this work, that I can say that we, in many ways, are still where we were 37 years ago. Some of the issues that I talk about in Black fatigue, like hair. So I wore a very short afro during my stint in the corporate world, and I was told by a leader, I was asked, will your hair grow? And I said, well, yes, it will. He said, well, you ought to let it. And so when we're still having discussions about hair, 37 years later. So in many ways, we've not really come as far as we might. And I'm very hopeful that this racial reckoning that started after the murder of George Floyd will be a movement and not a moment. But I am not convinced. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, I have a son as well. My son is a professor at Duke University, and he is in many ways in this work as well. His book is called Hope Draped in Black. And he is in the Department of Religion, a fully tenured professor in the Department of Religion, but he also has joint appointments in the African American Studies Department and the Gender Studies Department. And he looks at the intersection of oppression and culture, and how certain cultures hold hope in the wake of oppression. So that's who I am. And I am currently in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I love that. You're currently in Charlotte, but prior to that, you were based in DC, right?
And I was in DC for a while.
Yeah. I want to give this audience a better familiarization with your journey into the work and the space that you're in right now. Because as we were talking in preparation for the top of the hour, you mentioned I didn't start out as a DEI firm. I was in the research space. And so give us a little bit of that history.
Yes. So when I was with the Eastman Kodak Company, and what I like to say about the Eastman Kodak Company is that when I left to start my own business, they said, oh, let her leave. She'll be back anyway. She'll come back because she's not going to be able to make it. I heard this through the grapevine from one of the key leaders, because I was actually their token. I was making it in the organization. I was sent to an MBA program that only 4 people a year get selected for. I was the first Black, the youngest person, first Black woman, the youngest person to be sent. When I came back from that MBA program, the 3 other white men all got into higher level corporate positions, VP positions. And they said to me, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, you just spent all of this money on my MBA. I thought you might have had something in mind. So anyway, the point being that they didn't have anything in mind. And I ended up being in a role that was to look at the competition. Kodak had never really looked at the competition. Back then, in the mid 80s, they had 80% of the market share. We all know the demise of Kodak. And I was put into what was called a competitive intelligence department. There were only 2 people. They had just formed the department, and we were to look at the competitors. But we also did, research, market research, and qualitative and quantitative kinds of product model launches and those kinds of things. So that's how I got into the research business. And when I left Kodak, I started a market research firm where I was doing qualitative and quantitative market research around customers and, what kind of drinks people liked, and, all kinds of things. And then I started to get into more of survey work around employees. Back then we called it employee attitude survey. Now we call them engagement surveys. Yep. I think we have fancy names for everything these days, and probably something else now. And so I was asked, can you segment the data by race, gender, because diversity was becoming something that people were starting to talk about. And then they said, well, can you do training? And I said, no, I'm not a trainer. We're a research company. We don't do that. But after 3 or 4 clients started to ask about doing the training, I said, well, I am an entrepreneur. Let me kind of look into what this is. And of course, I did have the HR background and the background from affirmative action. So that's how the company sort of morphed into doing diversity, equity, and inclusion full-time, but we still have a research base. I mean, we still come from an audit approach. And right now we're really, really busy with audits, looking at the data. And what really surprises me, Nika, what really, really surprises me and everyone is that this data tells us where the inequities are. And there's so many things that could be easily fixed. For example, pay inequity. When you see the pay inequity and it's right there in front of you, just fix it. I had a client recently, very recently, who the reason that the pay inequities were discovered was because of George Floyd murder.
Mm-hmm.
We started to investigate, and Black employees came forward, and they found that 50% of the Black employees in the company, and there were only 36, so 18 of them, were underpaid by the company's own admission. And the answer that I got was, well, many of them are underpaid because they didn't ask for more.
Mm.
My point is that there's a lot that's intangible that we can't see, but there's so much that is tangible that could be easily fixed if we wanted to fix it. So I think that's the challenge that I'm giving now to my clients. And I know that wasn't your exact question, but how did I get from, research, how did I get from starting at research to this work? But the data is really, as you all know, I'm not telling you all anything you don't know, the data is so important to be able to have the data. But what do we do with the data?
Right.
And the deep-seated racism and deep-seated isms, all of the isms, don't allow us to actually correct what we already know and what we could do easily.
Right. Data is king. And I find, like you, sometimes we have to convince in organizations to believe the data, right? Believe it. It's telling a story. And if you're going to ask people to lean into their vulnerabilities, to share their insights, which can be risky for some people, right? Then we need to make sure there's a good feedback loop. We need to make sure that we're doing something about the information that they're bringing forth. And so I find that sometimes even the hurdle of being able to say, yes, we're going to gather this data can be a big conversation, because some people know that they're going to discover information that can feel uncomfortable, but we have to embrace that discomfort. And so I also love the fact that you're having conversations with your clients, and we are as well, about the need to disaggregate the data. We can't look at it as a whole. And once you do disaggregate the data, you will find that oftentimes there is a whole different lived experience out there for certain populations of people, and something can be done about it. So no, you took the question and you added to it, and it was great insight. So thank you so much for that. So we talked a little bit as we were preparing for today about what it means to meet people where they are. And that's become a big conversation as well, because as we're trying to get as many people engaged in this work, to embrace this work, we have to recognize that people have different entry points, different experiences, different appetite. So what does it mean exactly to meet people where they are? What does it look like in practice?
Community, I will tell you, right after George Floyd's murder, and so many corporations, not just in the United States, but all over the world, seemed to be surprised that racism was still alive and active. And I was like, this is not new, folks.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 37 years. We've got a 400 plus year history of this, not only in the United States, Canada, in the world. And we're surprised.
Mm-hmm.
So meeting people, so I think for some, meeting people where they are is like, you know what? You all cannot continue to use this excuse that you didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're going to go full blown with this. And, we're not going to allow you to say, teach me, because there's, you should know this. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, if we go in with our full blown, right? I don't care where you are. We're going to talk about white supremacy culture. We're going to go in. We may lose people. And so we have to reach this balance. And I have this conversation with my team all the time. As a matter of fact, my leadership team right now, we've had numerous conversations over the past couple of months about what does it mean, to meet our clients where they are. I was with a client yesterday in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was with the CEO and his direct reports. And the reason that they called me in was because some of the education and training that my company is doing, they said that their leaders were having, a problem with it, because we were using language like white supremacy culture, and people felt like they were being called white supremacists. So I have some people on my team who says, well, they just need to get over it. We're not calling them white supremacists. We're trying to help them understand, what this really means as the water that we all swim in, right? As a culture. And others are saying, well, if you lose people in the training, they shut down because you use this terminology. So now we've gone to white dominant culture. So they want to take the white out of it and just say dominant culture. So meeting people where they are, I think we really do have to recognize that, even though I would be the first to admit that we should be further along and that we shouldn't have to take baby steps or walk on eggshells, that the world should really know that inequities are alive and well. They play out differently across the globe, but they are alive and well. Yeah. And that's just a given, right? But we're not there. There are people who don't believe that it's a given. And so I think, I don't have a direct answer to what meeting people where they are means, but I do think that it has to be a balance so that you're not losing people. One of my people said, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Yes. No, I love that. And it is certainly a delicate dance. It's something that I think many practitioners have to think about every single day. And, this work, we need to approach it in a very strategic way. And so I love the notion of, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? If we realize that sometimes the guilting, the shaming, the blaming, the judging, the attacking, that's not going to cause a lot of people to want to engage. And we have to keep top of mind that our ultimate goal is to increase the likelihood for change. And that requires keeping that rapport, that influence, right? And so I love that approach. And I do think that it's certainly a delicate balance. So let's talk a little bit about Black fatigue. For those who don't know what that is, can you give us your definition of Black fatigue and how does it show up and impact the workplace?
Yeah, so Black fatigue, my definition, is the repeated variations of stress caused by racism, and it is intergenerational. So there are studies, scientific studies that have been done that show that, in fact, when you are under racial stress, that there's something that happens in your cellular system that gets passed down from generation to generation. I'm not a scientist or a medical person. I'm not going to go very far in that. Read it. It's in the book. I've explained it. But the idea that this fatigue is this deep, and this is this very, very deep malaise that oftentimes we don't even know because we've normalized it. We have normalized it, but it's the repeated variation. So when you're continually seeing images of people who look like you, who are being attacked, who are being murdered, and all of those things, when you continually in your workspace know that you are not being heard or seen, and you attribute it to to your race, even if you don't attribute it to your race, because you're not making that link, it still has that impact on you, on your physical and your mental person being. And so that's why, and the reason that I wrote Black Fatigue is because I was hearing, I'm a baby boomer, out here a long time, but I was hearing from millennials and Gen Zs that we're exhausted. That was the term that they were using. We're exhausted. I would be like, you're 25 years old, how are you exhausted already? They would look at me with that side eye, like, we respect you, but we know we're tired. So I'm thinking, if you're 25 years old and you're saying that you're exhausted from the racism, the work environment, wow. And so that's where I first got the idea to write about Black fatigue. And of course, once I got that idea, I kept hearing it because, that's the thing, right? Once you see something or hear something, then you hear it over and over again because you're looking for it. And I did. If you listen to some of the videos right around, George Floyd murder, you heard that a lot. You heard people saying, I'm exhausted. I'm really tired of this. Generations and decades and, hundreds of years, and I am just tired. So I wanted to write the book. And so the publisher, Barrett Kohler, somebody from the publishing house said, well, who is the book for? And I said, well, of course it's for white people. Black people, we know we're fatigued. We get it. And so they looked at me strangely and they said, yeah, but do you think white people will like read a book that's called Black Fatigue? I said, well, I hope so. I want them to. So now I realize that what I hear from Black people who have read it and other people of color, other Black Indigenous people of color, is that it was affirming for them, that it validated. And so
yeah.
it is also, but my audience in my head was, look, and I'll tell you what happened. I read Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility.
Mm-hmm.
And so after reading that, I said, okay, white fragility causes Black fatigue.
I love it. Yeah, no, I love it. And I love the subtitle, How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit. Sometimes we're just so conditioned to having to experience it that we don't know exactly how it's impacting us. And so I appreciate the fact that was amplified. So can you tell us a little bit more about how and why society needs to be more proactive in combating the effects of Black fatigue?
Well, it impacts everybody, not just Black people. I mean, as we all know this, any group that you keep down, it keeps everybody down. But when we, if you want a hard business case for those who perhaps are not, don't believe just in the moral issue, right? So the hard business case is things like the taxing of the healthcare system. Right. And so we know of the health disparities. And I write about it in the book. I think it's chapter 4 that says, racism literally makes you sick. And so that would be a reason why everybody should be concerned about this. If we're concerned about health, if we're concerned about the health of all people, then we should be understanding how racism does impact, because the studies show that things like diabetes, things like heart disease, things like, strokes, and of course our mental illnesses are exacerbated not by race, but by racism, because people will associate, Black people are more prone to these diseases. Well, part of the reasons they're more prone to these diseases is not because we eat poorly, necessarily. It's because of the day-to-day fear of the stress that comes from being in environments where that you're not included, where that you don't belong, or you're not given that sense of feeling that you belong, that you're always on guard. The study that Catalyst did a year or so ago, that Black and brown people and women as well felt that they had to be more on guard. I know when I was in the corporate arena, I came home and cried every night. I mean, I just didn't know who to be, how to be. And it was just very, it was not good. It was not good for my health. And today we have the pandemic, and we have, the hybrid work situation and the Great Resignation, and all of these things impact people of color and women as well more severely. And so there's a lot that we are carrying today. There's just a lot. And our identity as Black people, exacerbates all of that.
Absolutely. So in your book, you talk about the idea of race and space and grace and forgiveness. So tell us a little bit more about this and how it correlates to the council culture.
Yeah, so I think, so I actually think I wrote about that in Inclusive Conversations, but it's good and it's interesting. Let me tell you why the books both came out around the same time. So Black Fatigue was not supposed to come out until February of 2021. That would be this year. Yeah. However, when
George Floyd,
situation with George Floyd, right, the publisher said we need to make this, we need to update or accelerate. That's the word I'm looking for. We need to accelerate the pub date. So they did, but I already had in the works Inclusive Conversations. So anyway, so grace and space and cancel culture. So I think this is part of meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
If we continue to punish people for not knowing, then we're going to shut down conversation. Other people who might, have what we might consider a stupid question. Why don't you know that? Why don't you know the history of racism? Well, many people don't know the history of racism, particularly in the United States, because it's not taught in schools. And we have all sorts of efforts right now to keep it from being taught in schools.
Yeah.
Because they're using this term critical race theory.
Yeah.
I wrote on our blog post, the 10 truths about critical race theory. Folks, it's not being taught in K through 12. It's a law school course, and it's anyway, we know that. But the point is that people don't know because it hasn't been taught. And so I think that there's this sense that we've dealt with that. We're all the same now. And, things are just, moving along swimmingly. And, we know that that's not the case. And so I think we have to give some grace and space for mistakes. We're not perfect. Yeah. And I think that if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to move forward and have the conversation, because those people who want to or might be inclined would be fearful of saying the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. So this topic actually brings to mind a recent blog that I wrote, which was on accountability without shame. And I think there's relevance to that and what we're talking about here, because we do want to hold people accountable. And not knowing does not necessarily exonerate people from the impact, especially if it's harmful, of their actions. So there is this need to always press into the accountability piece. But what would be your thoughts on how do we do that without inflicting thoughts of shame? Because again, I'm totally with you. I do believe that if people feel guilted, shamed, judged, blamed, attacked, they're not going to engage. And that does not serve any of us well. So what would be your thoughts related to that question?
So, I do think that there is accountability, that people have to be accountable for their own feelings.
Yeah.
So if I feel shame and blame, I'm going to ask the question, why?
Yeah.
Look inside yourself and say, why did that engender shame for me? Mm-hmm. I'm not responsible for your feelings.
Right.
I can be compassionate and empathetic, but I'm not responsible for your feelings. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where we start. So a lot of our work is starting with that, with self-awareness. I'm sure yours is too, self-understanding, mm-hmm. And just asking the question, why did that trigger that for you? And so the group that I was with yesterday, when they were talking about, the white supremacy culture, and it made me feel bad. And I'm saying, and why is that?
Yeah.
Because I thought that I was being called a white supremacist. I said, but did anybody really call you a white supremacist? Mm-hmm. Well, no, but that's what it felt like. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that we shouldn't feel bad, this work is tough work. This don't make you feel bad. And that's part of the work. And I think so that's the way I like to handle that, to put the onus, to put the burden back mm-hmm. on the individual, to just be introspective, to just think about it, and in a kind way, not in an accusing or just to say, can think about what, like you to invite you to think about why that particular topic or that particular whatever it is caused that in you.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so good. That's so good. Thank you so much, MaryFrances. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but I want to also invite this community to get prepared to share your questions and contributions as well. You can do so by unmuting yourself, or you can also place your questions into the chat, and we will make sure that we center those into the conversation as well. So many corporations, they don't see the value in diversifying. And quite honestly, I've heard a lot of organizations talk about DEI as being a distraction. So what do you say to those individuals, and why is it so important to keep trying to foster this change?
A distraction. So mm-hmm. we don't work with those organizations. No. I'm laughing about this, but in all seriousness, we're not going to, there are going to be those organizations, those individuals, who just don't want to get it, who don't want to engage. And at some level, I say, okay, it's too much stress. It's fatiguing to try to bring individuals or organizations along when they don't want to come along.
Right.
I think we have enough, it's like the normal distribution curve, right? I think we've got enough people in that middle, some who are, still questioning, some who just don't know what to do. So yesterday we did some caucus work with these leaders. So we had a white woman caucus group, we had a people of color caucus group, and we had a white male caucus group. So I popped into each of the groups. I was actually there physically yesterday, my first business trip actually since the start of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was my first one yesterday. So I popped into the white male group, and the question was for them to explore how do you see white supremacy culture attributes playing out in you personally in the way that you lead. That was the question for them. So the people of color had no problem. They were writing on the board and they had all sorts of stuff done. You know, the white women were okay, but they were kind of dancing around it too. The white men were sitting there. And when I came in, I said, you know, I told them, I said, I'm going to pop into your groups. I said, but if you don't want me, if you're at a point in conversation, you don't want me there, fine. I'll step back out. So when I went in the white group, they said, please come in. They said, because we're clueless. They said, we don't know what to say. They said, we know that as white men, we're at the top of this, racial hierarchy here. And we know that, we're swimming in that water and we're the ones who, but we can't see it because we're in it, right? So my point is that there are enough people who really want to engage, that if those who are saying that this work is a distraction and they don't see it as being supportive of helping their organization grow.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm right there with you. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. So I do have more questions, but I'm going to shift now because I want to get the audience voice into this conversation. And let me just open it up. I do see a couple questions into the chat, but if someone would like to present your question live or your commentary, feel free to unmute yourself at this time or raise your hand and I can call on you. I'm looking across the board right now. Okay, Precious, go for it. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, everyone. And I thank you so much for this. I wanted to ask you, Ms. Winters, if you see value in having conversations with people when you have to help them come on board a bit, like they're not quite there, because that's a one we have to balance. I was on a call. It's so fresh for me this morning. And when I was explaining diversity, equity, and inclusion, the person told me he was with me with the diversity and the inclusion, but he didn't get that equity. He talked about how the government get involved. I've heard how it's a Democrat thing. And what else have I heard? That it's right. Ooh. And I said, I'm glad to hear. But and we can agree to disagree. But here's the thing. I stayed with him a bit longer. I wasn't trying to convince him, and I let him know that. But in staying with him, I put some truth on top of his head in a way that he couldn't deny it. He still messed up. He's still sending me texts right almost before this call right here. But I wouldn't have gotten that had I not spent a little time with him. Because sometimes people are not worth throwing away. They just need a little working with. But that's if we choose to. And if there's something in that interaction that leads us to, or that they are receptive to. Because I can get how you're limited and ignorant. If your experiences have been very limiting and ignorant, you're just not able to see that yet. But if you're open to it, so my point is, how do you balance that and how much you choose to give of yourself to people who don't get it, but maybe would? Because I'm thinking if we just wash our hands of them, then we have a greater group that are comfortable staying in some of their ignorance than if it makes us real tired, like that Black fatigue. But if we choose to sometimes give a little bit more, it can enhance what they're working with. I hope you got something from that you can work with.
I did. Thank you. So Precious, where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm actually in Louisiana, in the deep, dirty South right now.
Okay, so you're in Louisiana. Okay, all right, great. So, it's you just put on the table a really, really tough question, because on the one hand, the current thinking is, we're not your teachers. I'm not your teacher, because it's fatiguing for me to be your teacher. So it's kind of like, white people, you got to do your own work. And there's plenty of resources out there for you to do your own work. On the other hand, as Precious points out, if in fact somebody just needs a little bit of help and you have some nuggets, or you have a way of being able to influence someone's thinking who perhaps just didn't know, then I feel that it is this is me personally. I'm not putting this on anybody else to embrace my philosophy, but my philosophy is that it is my responsibility as a human, as somebody who is passionate about justice, to share that. So I think it's number one, I think it is personal. I think, secondly, if we don't do some of that, how are we going to move as a society? And so I too have clients who will not put equity in their DEI. They won't say DEI, they will only say D&I, and they don't believe in equity. Because as you have pointed out, it's equality of opportunities. The argument is equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, right? And so if I give you the opportunity and the outcome is not there, well, then that's not, then that's not my fault. Those people probably don't have a deep understanding of the history and how these interlocking systems have created a society where there are people who just have not had, who are behind. Because when I say behind, I'm thinking of a racetrack now. So if you're going to run, right, and you're on track, people start at different points because they know that if everybody started at the same place, it's not going to be equitable. But the point is that yes, equity is fraught today with controversy. Why, I don't know, but this is part of this struggle to get people to even understand why equity and not just equality is so key. And I believe that we have to have equity first. We have to have equity so that we can get to equality.
Yeah, I want to second that. If equality is the hope for end, which it is, all people should be treated equal, then equity is the means to get us there. And so I so appreciate your commentary there. Linroy has his hand raised. You have the floor now, sir. Share your question or comments. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I've been to probably 100 of these gatherings in different spaces. And the question that keeps bubbling up for me is, who's missing from the DEI conversation for significant change to the good to occur? And how do we get these individuals to the table?
So I say it's what I call them in my book, Inclusive Conversations, and maybe in Black with Tea, I don't remember, but I call them power brokers. And I use that term very specifically. And if you look it up in the dictionary, a power broker is an insider who has influence to change systems and also to influence other people to change. And so those power brokers, we saw them come forward after George Floyd, when they declared, we're going to do this, that, and the other. We're going to give this money. We're going to have Juneteenth is going to be a holiday. Not that that's going to change any system, but anyway. But my point is, they had the power to do that, to say, this is not going to be anymore, and I am going to declare that we are going to do this. So those are the people, and I believe it's the corporate world that's going to make it happen. I don't think it's the government. I think it's the corporate world, because the corporate world has the most at stake. We're talking about recruiting, and we're talking about talent and who wants to work for an organization. And we know that the generation coming along, they don't want to work for organizations that don't have justice and equity as a part of what they care about. So who's not at the table, I think, are the people who, and they say that they're at the table, but they're at the table still in this very, sort of mild way, because we've got the action, CEO action group and whatnot, but they're doing what they've always done. And we do what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always gotten, right? So they're doing what they've always done, giving money to the NAACP and the Urban League and all those kinds of organizations, which is fine, but that's not going to change anything. And so these power brokers need to actually make some decisions and declare. Example, again, the organization that I was with yesterday. So spending all this time with the leadership team and whatnot, and then I learned in the conversation that the education that we're providing to the second level, the tier down from these senior leaders, it's not mandatory. It's not mandatory. They can go if they want to. And I'm at a point in time in my career that I just looked at them like this. I said, are you serious? I said, so if we don't start to say we are going to do this because it's good for everybody, and those in power. So that's who's not, from my perspective, That's news how to say. We've got a lot of grassroots folks. We've got a lot of activists. Allyship. We talk about allyship all the time now, right? Allies are great, but allies are oftentimes not in the power to change anything. They can change interpersonal interactions often, about the bystander and all that kind of stuff, right? But they're not changing systems. And so we need people at the table who can change systems. I don't know if that's answering your question, Mr.
Yeah,
John.
that gets to it. The second part of it was, how do you get them to the table? Is the answer that you shared about basically requiring it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if we say we're serious, we say that this is important, that this is critical, and you don't require it.
Right. And can I do a follow-up? And it's not directly related. So we have leadership books, we have books on leadership, team building, etc. Right? And we have authors, bestsellers, multiple books. But when you read about leadership with these individuals, you never really deal with this it factor. So as an African American male, straight, how I have to do leadership is different than my counterpart. And I'm always curious about, where's that accountability? And I could throw out an author name, but you can pick and choose anyone you want, and you can go and read those books. And it really doesn't deal with ethnicity, it doesn't deal with gender, it doesn't deal with LGBTQA+, etc. It's kind of a generic, and so any thoughts on that? And that's my final question.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree, and I've written somewhere about that the generic leadership models do not take into account the and they're not just nuances. I mean, they're more than nuances, but the issues of leading multicultural groups, or if you're a Black or a person of color or a woman. There's a lot more about women in leadership and the differences than there is about people of color. But there is a book, and I'm looking this way because I'm looking at my bookshelf, and I'll find it. But because there is a book about Blacks in leadership that's very good. It's an anthology of edited pieces by a bunch of academicians. And Nika, you would know who I'm talking. Laura, she writes for Harvard Business Review a lot. Laura Roberts. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Laura Roberts. Yeah,
We
so
probably can. Yeah, I was going to say we can see if we can source it and place it into the chat.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so we're getting close to our time. I want to try to get in as many additional questions as possible. We're going to go to Zoe, Tracy, Nadine, and in that order. So Zoe. Welcome.
Thank you for the time. I have several questions, and I'm sure you started touching on the first one, which was love to hear more about your insights. And I think you were just touching on a lot of them. Since you have so many years of experience in this space, both personally and professionally, I would love to hear your biggest insights on making corporations create lasting change. That would be my first question. I think you were kind of touching on it just now. My second question is, how on earth have you protected your energy for 37 years? I would love to hear more about that. And also to touch on a point that you alluded to in the beginning around movement versus a moment.
Okay, I'm sorry. The first one was, the second one, is it in the chat?
It is in the chat, but I will happily repeat it.
Let me try to find it in the chat. So I'm going to talk about the third one because that's the one that I remember. How have I protected my my energy? So I have a different philosophy. So I'm going to just be real honest with you. There's a whole lot of talk today about rest is resistance, and it's not my work to do. I need to rest and all. And I wrote Black Fatigue, so I get that. But I've blended my life, and this is my passion work, so it doesn't feel like passion. I mean, it doesn't feel like work to me. So it is my energy. It's where I'm fueled by it. Every time I hear that there's been some progress made in this arena, it just really it just fuels me to do more. So that's just who I am. Relative to the moment and movement, I still haven't found your question in the chat, but I'm still looking. But relative to the movement, and I see it now. movement versus a moment. I think it's a moment. I mean, I absolutely think there we go. I absolutely think if we do not keep our eyes open and continue to be vigilant, and that's the fatigue, right? Because it's fatiguing. We cannot let up for even a minute. We just can't. We've got to keep it going. And I hate to say it, but is it going to be until the next time we have protests or the next George Floyd? Is that when it's going to come back again? I'm already seeing my clients back away from this work. They say, oh, we're going to do anti-racism work. And when you bring it forward to them, oh, is that what anti-racism work? No, we can't do that. We need to go back to this sort of sanitized where everybody feels good. And, and so I think that it for those of us for whom this is our passion, we've got to keep it going, because I do believe that it's really more of a moment than it is a movement. So creating lasting change, that was the other one. So it's got to be in the fabric of people say it's in the fabric of the organization. However, what happens when a new leader comes, a new CEO comes, they move in another direction, it's got to be so much in the system that it can't even be undone. We're not even close to getting this so embedded in the systems that it can't be undone. And so that's what needs to be done. I don't want to take up any more time, but that's the hard work of getting it so embedded that it can't be undone.
Right. Tracy and Nadine. Tracy, did you still have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry. Just as you called on me, my computer started spazzing out. So it's really a comment. I'll be real quick. Dr. Ibrahim Kendi often says that he doesn't feel it's his responsibility to bring people along that don't get this work. He's not in the posture of convincing. And I kind of feel like you, Dr. MaryFrances Winters, that you do have to engage people in order to make progress. But I went through a situation in a former job where I really was completely depleted and so beat down that I started putting the emphasis on my self-care. So what I will say as a DEI practitioner is practice the self-care, but do what you can to try to advance the conversation. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, we have to know what emotional capital we have to give to these types of conversations. So thank you. Nadine.
Okay, so it's really interesting how Sister just kind of took my tonsils out, because I've been sitting here with very mixed emotions. I mean, I have to ask Dr. Winters, when you are so tired and so daggone beat down for so many years and generations, how in the world and why in the world should we always extend such grace and education when it seemingly is like chasing your tail? Is that, and then you get more tired with the rejection and a dismissal.
So, and I put in the chat, self-care is absolutely critical. So I hope that you didn't take, I hope nobody on this session took from what I said that self-care is not absolutely, critical. So, I do my self-care. I absolutely do my self-care. I spend time in the Caribbean. I spend sometimes a couple months in the Caribbean, right? So I do my self-care and other things that I do, my meditation and yoga and all those kinds of things that fuel me, things that make me happy, right? I do that. And I think that is critical. So if not you, who? If not us, who? So if we all, let's just like take this to the extreme. So if we all say, this is not my work, this white people's work, I'm tired, I'm beat down, I just can't do it anymore. Everybody says that we're done. How do we move forward? So I think it's a community. I think we have to care for each other. I think we have to look at this, that it's not my responsibility, that it's our collective responsibility, including white people, the collective responsibility. I'm going to do what I can, and I'm hoping you're going to do what you can too. But once I've done what I think I can, I'm not going to feel guilty about not doing anything more. Right? So it's really is recognizing, being okay with whatever that is, whatever that effort is, and not saying, oh, I should have done more. Is that helpful? Maybe? Nadine.
Yes, I thank you. I mean, I just admit that it's very, very difficult day to day sometimes.
It is very difficult. And it's, for me, it's important to have other people to talk to about that difficulty. Right.
I agree.
You know, in our community, in the Black community, therapy hasn't, you know, it's one of the things for previous generations, you know, poo-pooed that kind of stuff. But I'm noticing that with my younger team, as a matter of fact, they're asking, you know, for our benefits and whatnot, can we have therapy as a part of, and I see some head shaking, can we have therapy as a part of what is offered, you know, as part of our benefits package? Not to be ashamed and say, hey, I need some help with this, you know.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you for the question, Nadine. So I'm going to go to my colleague, Dr. Ashton Chapman, who has a question at this time. And this may be our final question for today. Ashton?
Thanks so much, Nika, and thanks everyone for the really dynamic conversation so far. So as a fellow researcher, I really resonate with the conversation that we started with around data. And I'm curious about, MaryFrances, how you respond to requests for benchmarking from organizations. We know that they often want to know sort of how their data stack up against their competitors, particularly when it comes to DE&I. And it's been my experience that sometimes that request comes or feels like a way for organizations to sort of deflect the really hard work of deep diving into their own learnings from their own organization. So just wanted you to speak a little bit to your approach to benchmarking.
Thank you for that, Ashton. Yeah, I'm not a big believer in benchmarking because you're going to benchmark yourself against, you know, so people will ask me, so who's doing really well? What company, what corporation is doing really well? None of them. Even though they get the top 50 and all of that, none of them are doing really well by my standards, right? Because if you just look at the data, right? When you look at their data, they're not, if that's all you want to look at, you know, what's the percentage of women in leadership? What's the percentage of Black people in leadership? If you just look at representation, they're not doing well. We know that. I mean, that's just it, right? So don't benchmark yourself against somebody else who's not doing well. Set your own standard. Where do you want to be? What looks like success for you? So that's my opinion on
Great.
that.
100%. We're right there with you. We get that question a bit at NWC. So I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question because Samantha had one early on, and it was when we were talking about disaggregating the data. And her question is, I'm curious about the data and the importance to disaggregate it. I have seen reluctance to provide that information, and I'm assuming that Samantha is referring to the individuals providing the demographic information. How can we accomplish disaggregation of information if we don't have it? You have to get it. MaryFrances.
I'm telling you, you know, again, 37 years, sometimes I just shake my head. We were just on a call with a client, a not-for-profit client yesterday, and they said, oh, will we do who's the people, who are the big survey people? Anyway, we do this survey and they don't disaggregate the data. And we don't disaggregate the data because we're afraid if we do that, then somebody might be identified. I'm like, well, you don't disaggregate it to a point where one person's going to be identified. If you know you only got one Black person in the X department, then we don't disaggregate that.
Right.
Data. We aggregate it to, you know, to a point. Gallup is the company I was trying to use.
Okay.
To think of. They use Gallup data. But anyway, I think it's just an excuse. And if you're not gonna look at your data, then you're absolutely not serious. And what we're trying to do now is get folks to disaggregate the data down to intersectionality. So looking at Black women, millennials, you know, looking at Asian male, you know, Gen Xers, you know, right? But oftentimes there are so few in any one of those intersectional categories that, again, you get down to, well, it's only two people. And so, you know, they're going to know who those two people are. So it really, and I think one of the ways, so that's the data thing is an issue because of low numbers, reluctance to do it. I've had clients say to me, we don't want to look at this data because if we look at the data, then we're going to have to do something about it.
I know. We've heard that as well, MaryFrances, and it's so disheartening and frustrating. And Yeah, we have to just stay the course and keep impressing upon people the importance of, why even collect the data if you have no intentions of doing anything with it in the first place? Because you're setting people up to have expectations, and that's also very exhausting. So this has been a rich conversation. I want to thank you, MaryFrances, for sharing your wisdom, your insight, your time with us today. Congratulations on 37 years, and continue to keep making the significant impact that you are. Thank you for saying yes to our invite. I always say that it makes us feel seen, valued, and heard when our guest co-hosts say yes. And we just value the time that you've shared with us today. Thank you to this podcast community. Anticipate this afternoon a follow-up email. We'll have a link to the replay. If it was of value to you, then share it out with someone else. And we look forward to seeing you again on a future Intentional Conversations VodCast. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. Be well. Peace and blessings.